Hi there, this is Cantor Mike with part 3 of the overview on Torah cantillation. In the previous videos, we laid the groundwork by showing you how to apply trope to an individual word and to use the trope to figure out the proper syllable to stress. Then we learned about how trope families work and how trope works to add punctuation to the text. In this video, we're going to look at a trope family that occurs in every single verse of the Tanakh, without exception. It's pretty hard to make any definitive claims like that when it comes to Torah, but this is one rule that has no exceptions, and in a moment we'll see why. In the first two videos, we spent a lot of time looking at the first two words on this line. Those words being, let me get my little, there we go, get that magnifying glass. This word Shema and Yisrael. And we looked at, particularly if you look at where my cursor is, this trope here, Tipcha, and this trope Et Nachta. Okay, now as with Et Nachta, where we learned that the most important trope comes at the end of the sequence, we're going to start at the end of the first line, which is right here. So we got the whole first line, and we are at the end. And we're looking at these two diamonds that I'm pointing at. Now this is a trope called Soph Pasuk, which literally means the end of the verse. What we're looking at here is the trope equivalent of a period. And that's why Soph Pasuk is the only family that occurs in every single verse, because every verse, every Pasuk, has an end, or a Soph. Hence the name Soph Pasuk. Now before we look at the whole family, let's get a little more familiar with Soph Pasuk itself. Here's our Soph Pasuk right here on the left. Probably don't need that. You can just use the cursor. And here's our word broken up into our get ready and go pieces. You might be wondering how I knew where to divide this word. The reason for that is because we've got these two diamonds here at the end, right next to the last letter of the word, which is how we know we've come to the end of a pasuk. But we haven't seen a trope like this before that comes at the end of the word. Everything that we've seen so far, all the tropes appear underneath the syllable to be emphasized. So having the diamonds at the end doesn't show us where the emphasis should be. What we'll eventually see is that tropes can be above, below, or even in between words. Now, we've already learned that the emphasis on a word could be on either the last syllable, which is called mil-ra, or the next to last syllable, which is called mil-el. But with Soph Pasuk always being at the end of the word, we're going to need more information to tell us where the stressed syllable is, which is why we've got this little extra line down here. You can see I'm pointing to it with my cursor, called a siluk. The purpose of the siluk is to show us which syllable to emphasize. So in this case, for this word, the trope works together, the trope here works together with the siluk here to let us know both that we've reached the end of a verse and to show us which syllable to emphasize. Having said that, let's get back now to how this trope sounds. The go syllable sounds like this. Da da, and the get ready syllable sounds like this. Da, together, da da da, da da da. The word is echad, and when we put the word together with the trope, you may want to pause and try this for yourself first. We have echad, echad. Let's take a look at a couple of other examples from our text. This word is pronounced einecha, not einecha. If we look to see where the siluk is, it's underneath the nun. So we immediately realize that this is a mil-el word, which means what? It means that the second to last syllable is emphasized. That means we're going to have to take the go part of our trope and stretch it over the end syllable. So if the go part sounds like this, da da, then those two syllables will sound like necha, necha. vecha. And if we add the get ready part of the trope, we chant da da da. When we add it to the whole word, it sounds like, and you'll want to pause to try it yourself, it sounds like einecha. So let's look at one more example before we go on. A little more complicated one here. So this is one of these compound words that we've seen before, which is two words linked together by this dash here, which we called a kaf. Remember, all that means is that we're going to treat these two words here as if they were one word. So there's going to be one trope that essentially is covering two words. Again, we have the siluk right here under the vet on the next to last syllable, which makes this what kind of word? Mil el or mil ra? Yes, a mil el word. So we're going to stretch the go part of the trope, da da. Again, just like we did with the previous word, over both of these syllables. We also have, in this case, a few syllables before the go syllable. So we'll have to take that get ready part of the trope and repeat it a few times. So instead of da da da, we're going to have da 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 da. Okay, and you might want to try the word for yourself before I chant it. If you chanted it correctly, you will have chanted Al levavecha, Al levavecha. If that's what you got, great. If not, just keep at it, and I promise it'll start to make sense eventually. Looking back at our text, we see I've put little red boxes around each one of these Soph Pasuks. There's one here at the end of the first line. There's another one here, beginning of the third line. Another one here, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6. In this whole selection here, we have 6 of these. So if we do the math, what that tells us, even if we didn't have these handy-dandy English verse numbers here, or Arabic, I guess, we didn't have these verse numbers, we will know that when we see, because we see 6 Soph Pasuk symbols, we know that there are exactly 6 verses in this selection. And when we looked at etnachta, we talked about its function as a major punctuation mark and how it almost always appears in sequence with other members of its family. Soph Pasuk also appears in sequence with other members of its own family. It happens to be the strongest punctuation mark that we have, equivalent of a period. One of the things, though, that makes this family interesting is that Soph Pasuk and etnachta share the same family members. You'll see here that we have a tipcha here before the etnachta, but I'm into this next phrase now, and I've got mercha, tipcha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. We've got the same family members being shared by different families. What that tells us, if we didn't already understand, is that if we really want to know how to chant a particular sequence, we have to first know how it ends. Just knowing how it starts isn't going to tell us necessarily how to chant it, how to chant the complete sequence. So we always have to start with the end of the sequence before we really learn how a particular sequence is chanted. So let's take a couple of look at some of these Soph Pasuk sequences without all the words in the way. We're going to start again with our basic sequence. It's comprised of 4 separate tropes. From right to left, we have mercha, tipcha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. And together they all sound like mercha, tipecha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. One thing we may notice, if you didn't already see it, is that in place of the munach, which the etnachta sequence had right here, we've got the mercha repeated. And you may have also noticed that it sounded exactly the same. So we don't even have to learn any new tropes here, except for the Soph Pasuk. So again, I'm going to chant it again. Mercha, tipecha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. Now that we've seen the basic Soph Pasuk sequence, let's go back to our text and see what other Soph Pasuk sequences we have. In this picture, if it's green, that means it's part of the Soph Pasuk family. We've already determined that we've got 6 different Soph Pasuk sequences, so let's take a look at them all. I'm just going to point to them. Now let me put the magnifier on. In this first one, we've got mercha, tipcha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. In the second line, we've got mercha, tipcha, and continuing on to the third line, Soph Pasuk. In the next one, we have tipcha, Soph Pasuk. Again, tipcha, Soph Pasuk. Here on the next line, mercha, tipcha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. And then finally here on the last line, continuing from the previous line, we've got mercha, tipcha, Soph Pasuk. So those are our six phrases. Let's make a chart out of them like we did with the Etnachta family. At the top of the chart, we've got the basic phrase, which we already know goes like this. Mercha, tipecha, mercha, Soph Pasuk. On the second line, we've got tipcha, mercha, Soph Pasuk, which, by the way, didn't actually appear as a sequence in our text, but it is one of the combinations. Just by dropping out the mercha, we are left with that. The third line, we have tipecha, Soph Pasuk. And the fourth line, mercha, tipecha, Soph Pasuk. And every once in a while, you will get a Soph Pasuk by itself, chanted without any other members of its family. It's pretty rare, but it does happen. So now when we go back to our text, we can see that we know a little bit more than we did before. Actually, we know a lot more. It looks like we know more than half of it. That doesn't happen to be the case with every text, but we happen to get lucky with this one. Now let's take a look at this first line. We learned how to chant these purple and green phrases separately, but there's nothing stopping us now from putting them together and chanting the whole pasuk. But all we need in this next verse, all we need is one more word, and we can chant the whole pasuk through to the end. This next verse here, we have quite a few words that we still have yet to, quite a few symbols we haven't encountered yet, but we do have the end, right? Because we have the Soph Pasuk, and every verse has one. Here in this next pasuk, we're missing that, but we've got this phrase, missing another phrase, but we've got the end, of course. Verse 8, oh, we got the whole verse again. Verse 9, we're missing the first word, but then we have the end. So we're actually doing pretty well here. I'm going to go ahead and chant what we have, just so you can hear where we are. Now, that should start to sound very familiar because we, in many places we do chant this out loud, according to the trope, in synagogue. So here's how it goes. I'm just going to skip over the words that we haven't learned yet. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Skipping. Et Adonai Elohecha, bechol levavecha, uvchol nafshecha, uvchol meodecha. Skipping this section here, coming back with Hayom. Hayom al levavecha. Skipping to this word. V'dibata bam. Now, you might have heard this chanted V'dibarta, but the trope is under the tav. So that tells us that the pronunciation, the correct chanting is V'dibarta bam. Now, we know Etnachta also sounds like da-da, but since this word only has go, and we went over this once before, it's just bam. Okay? Skipping over a few more words, here we have Uvshochbecha, uvkumecha. Continuing with verse 8. Ukshatam leot al yadecha, vehayu letotafot bein einecha. Now, I'm going to skip over all of verse 9 because what we tend to do here is chant this Soph Pasuk phrase in a slightly different way. I'm not going to teach you that way just yet, so we're going to actually skip it. Let's say you're one of these people that doesn't like color, or maybe looking at this text with all these colors actually confuses you more than it helps you. If you still want to get a little more practice before you on the trope before you jump into the text, here's a little exercise you can do to help get you used to the idea of stringing together these different trope phrases. You want to take a blank sheet of paper, so let's do that now. Here's our blank sheet of paper. We're going to draw a series of lines. Each one of those lines is going to represent a word. We're going to start with the very first phrase we learned, which is 2 words long, right? So we have Shema Yisrael, 2 words long. We've got Tipcha and an Etnachta in that order. So we're going to go back and write those tropes just the way we saw them in the text and practice chanting them. It may be helpful for you to keep your chart handy while you're doing this until you get the hang of it. So if we're chanting just these 2 tropes, the way we see them here is Tipcha Etnachta. Okay, you can chant them as many times as you need to till you can really get it nice and smooth. We go back to look at the text. In our next phrase, and we have 4 words, Mercha, Tipcha, Mercha, Soph Pasuk. You may also have noticed that there's a line here after the word Adonai. That line is relevant, but we are not going to talk about it just yet because it could appear in any sequence. So since I really want to focus on the sequence that we're talking about right now, so we'll get to that in another video. But in any case, I have these four tropes, and they happen to be our basic Soph Pasuk sequence. So we're going to write them in just the way we saw them in our text. Okay, and we'll practice chanting those. Mercha, Tipecha, Mercha, Soph Pasuk. And the next step is that we want to get used to chanting both of them one after the other. So we can start here. Tipecha etnachta, mercha tipecha, mercha Soph Pasuk. What I normally tell students is to chant the tropes as many times as they need to so that they can chant them without having to think. So if you have to pause between each of these phrases, like pause after the etnachta before you chant the beginning of this next phrase, then you'll know that you probably still are doing a little bit of extra thinking about how it goes, which means that you need a little more practice. Eventually, you'll want to smooth out all those thinking pauses, leaving only a sufficient pause to indicate that this etnachta here is a significant punctuation. It doesn't need to be a big pause, but there is a pause there. What you'll probably find is that you can chant the 2 phrases pretty easily, separately, but you have some difficulty chanting them one right after the other. That's pretty common. What I recommend if you're having that particular issue is to focus on the 2 transition tropes, this last trope here and the first trope here. So let's highlight those a little bit. What we want to do is just chant them and get used to hearing them together as many times as you need to do it so that we can chant them without having to stop and think about how they go. So I'm going to chant, instead of trying to chant all of it, I'm just going to focus on these 2. Etnachta, mercha, etnachta, mercha, etnachta, mercha, etnachta, mercha. Okay, so that's an easy way to remember those if you have those 2 right in a row. Remember that etnachta is meant to have a pause afterwards, otherwise it doesn't fulfill its role as a punctuation mark. Remember also that you don't want to be pausing because you can't remember how the next trope goes. So if you're still pausing because you can't remember, you just want to keep repeating it until you can do it with confidence. and not have that thinking pause. Once you have the transition tropes down, then you can try singing both phrases together again. Now, don't worry if you don't get it the first time out. As long as you know how to chant the sequences separately, you'll eventually learn how to put them together to build longer phrases and verses. Of course, you wouldn't want to stop there. We've got plenty more phrases back here in our text to practice on. Eventually, what you'll want to do is be able to read the trope as it appears in the text as easily as you read in English, or as easily as you read the Hebrew on the page. Until then, it's always a big help to rewrite them and practice them separately from the text. So if we were going to continue on with the exercise we were just doing, we would eventually have a page that started to look something like this. Okay? I've written out the phrases on separate lines in the order that they appear. You'll notice that I have a blank line here, and that corresponds back here to this word that I'm pointing at, where we don't know these tropes yet. Okay, there are actually two tropes on one word, and we'll deal with that in the next video. But for now, we're just going to leave a space for that so that when we eventually get to that, we can fill it in the space. I can just chant the tropes I have as an exercise, though, and get really good at chanting these particular sequences as they occur in the text. The only other thing I might do is, instead of giving each sequence its own line, I might want to extend the line so that I see the tropes more like they occur in the actual text. In this case, I've done it so that each verse gets its own line, but it doesn't have to be that way. I can extend the lines as far across the page as I want so that everything just flows together in one continuous paragraph. What I would do next is I would just keep writing the trope sequences in as they occur, leaving spaces to add the new tropes that I learn as I learn them. Eventually I would fill up all the lines and then continue practicing and chanting the tropes on a sheet that looks something like this. Now, this is a great way to practice being able to make the transitions between trope sequences as smooth as possible. So that's it for this particular family. When we look back at our original text, we still have some pretty big gaps in our knowledge, but we're actually more than halfway there. Of course, as you may have already guessed, the real trick with Torah reading is to be able to remember how the trope sounds while you're looking at a text that looks like this. It's really easy when you're looking at the text with all the highlighting on it, but once you start to understand how the tropes work and how they fit together in sequences, and you're clear in your head about how they sound, then chanting from an actual Torah scroll that looks more like this starts to become much easier. So that's it for this video. Join me for the next part of the series when we discuss the last major trope family. Up until now, we've only met tropes that live underneath the words or at the end, but now we're going to be moving up in the world. We'll see that brings with it some additional challenges, but nothing we can't handle. See you soon, and happy laning.